All right, perfect. Thanks, Courtney. That was my key. I was waiting for that. All right, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. If others join us, that's fine. We'll kind of continue on with it. This is going to be recorded to allow folks to view it later. This is a pretty kind of open conversation about some ideas to help support you as you're developing these small catalyst grants. It is very much geared towards folks maybe you don't have a lot of experience in doing grants. This grant process is a little less arduous than some of the massive ones. So if you've worked on one of the big ones, you have an advantage because this is definitely going to be a little bit less work than those large like USAID projects, etc. So we're going to just jump into it. I'm Gabrielle Johnson, and I support the Marine Protected Areas Center at NOAA as a contractor. I give a lot of support to our international development work, and that includes working with the Local Islands 2030 on this regenerative tourism community of practice. And so we just released the RFP for these grants a few weeks ago, and we're trying to provide support to folks to help them move through the process. We also have an in-person meeting of the community of practice coming up in April in Hawaii. And during that session, we will also provide some additional support and peer-to-peer discussions, et cetera, to help folks through this process if they're not as familiar on how to think through an idea and explain it well enough for a review committee to be able to make a decision in terms of where they're headed with their work. And so I'm going to turn it over to the Ocean Foundation, who's hosting us today and is also a key partner in this work, and I'll have Courtney and Ben introduce themselves. And Jason.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, Jason as well. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our kind of second informational session. It's really an honor to be with all of you, learning more about regenerative tourism. We're really excited about this grant opportunity. The Ocean Foundation is serving as the fiscal host for this grant competition, so you can direct any questions to Courtney Park, my colleague. Courtney?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, all the above, depending on where you're at. I'm Courtney Park. I'm a program associate at the Ocean Foundation, and Ben kind of introduced our role, and all questions can be directed at me. My email can be found in the RFP, and then I can also toss it down in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. I just actually threw that in there, but if you want to provide your email, that would be great. Hi, Jason Donofrio, Chief Development Officer for the Ocean Foundation. And I think the RFP does, if you click on that in terms of eligibility criteria, we did try and present all that information. So hopefully, if you've gone through that, it answers a lot of questions, but please, yes, reach out to us with any additional questions you might have. I guess, Gabrielle, we can turn it back over to you, or if you want to open it up for questions that folks may have now.
Yes, and I'll have Scott Shadow also introduce himself, and then we have some other NOAA folks that just joined. I have to fix a preference on my computer to share my screen, so give me one moment. But Scott, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Chateau. I'm the Island Resilience Associate working with the NOAA Climate Programs Office, and I would be working very closely with the Local 2030 Island Network very shortly. And I am here to give a little presentation or a little addition to the presentation about kind of general proposal pointers. So we'll go into that in a little bit, but very happy to be here.
All right, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of the other NOAA folks that just joined us, Andrea and Lisa. If you just want to say hello, you don't have to go on camera or anything fancy.
Sure, thanks, Gabrielle. Andrea Morales Barboza. I work in NOAA's Climate Program Office, where we work closely with our colleagues at the Local 2030 Islands Network and the Ocean Foundation. And I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Hi, excuse me, sorry. I apologize. I'm Lisa Vaughn. I work with Andrea in the Climate Program Office, and we enjoy a very fruitful collaboration with the Local 2030 Islands Network and the Ocean Foundation, and are really excited to hear the discussion tonight. Thanks.
Sorry, and then we have Samantha, I think, joined as well from the 2030 Network.
Hi, Gabrielle. Aloha, colleagues. My name is Samantha Happ. I'm the Managing Director of the Local 2030 Islands Network. It's great to see many of our colleagues from across the globe here, and looking forward to seeing many of you in Honolulu next month.
All right, great. Did I miss anyone else from our team? We have quite a few folks joining, which is great because it's late on the East Coast for many of them. All right, fantastic. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. I have a new computer that's still kind of funky with Zoom. So I'm just going to jump right into it, and then we'll pause after each section to allow folks if they have questions or anything they want to ask or comment on. So we'll kind of bounce around. This is kind of a casual session, so please feel free to raise your hand, put something in the chat, and we'll go from there. All right, so this is where we're going to head today. We're going to do a quick review of regenerative tourism. If you were able to join the Q1 session last week, Diane, who works with the Collaborative Lab on Tourism, gave kind of a little review on regenerative tourism. So I just want to honor that and make sure you all get a chance to see that again if you by chance missed that session last week. So that will just take a few minutes. And then we're going to take a look at the RFP. If you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, I have a QR code that will send you over to the link to it. And we'll just kind of go through some key areas that will help you make sure you understand the eligibility requirements and then the different parts. And then Scott, as well as the folks from the Ocean Foundation, I welcome their input as well. We'll give some pointers on how to think about an RFP and some key things to look for as you go through the process. I'll also jump in. I've reviewed a few grants under some of the NOAA work, and there's a few things that we notice in overall proposal preparing that folks sometimes miss that might help you in preparing these. I'll do a little bit on writing objectives. So there's two kinds of objectives we're going to review, and this just helps you kind of set the foundation for your work to really be able to explain what you're trying to accomplish to the reviewers. We'll talk a bit about monitoring and evaluation. This very much ties to your objectives, because the key thing with these Catalyst grants is we are looking for this sort of innovative impact moment. So there's a bit more to think about when you're doing it, monitoring and evaluation process. And then the last little bit is kind of a discussion on outcomes versus impact and kind of thinking through the whole project proposal process and the different components that tie to each other in helping lead towards formulating that long-term sustainability impact. And then we'll do some time for questions. So this is my plan in minutes. I don't guarantee I'm going to stick to it, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of the flow of our session today. All right. Any questions so far? Hopefully that's pretty clear. All right, so Diane, I ran across her name again today when I was looking for some nice photos, and I thought this was a really great quote that she put out there that is a description of regenerative tourism at its simplest is about ensuring the visitor economy delivers a net positive benefit to communities, the environment, and the destination. So it's sort of a multifaceted approach. And so it's a net positive return. And I also like her extra little point here is that it actively and intentionally creates the conditions for communities and places to thrive and flourish. So we get to visit a lot of really special places in the world, and a lot of the islands in our community of practice have some incredible places. And so we want to be able to enjoy those areas, but also see them flourish and thrive, and also the communities benefit from them. So that's the whole sort of foundational component to the regenerative tourism idea. So as you're developing a project, really take this to heart. This is really the crux of what we're looking for. And I think last week, Jason gave some really good examples as well from projects the Ocean Foundation has supported. So if you by chance missed that session, it is recorded, and there's a link on the website we'll go to shortly that you can go back and review those. But those give you some ideas of some of the projects we would love to see come across our desk in the next few months. So Diane last week also talked about some guiding principles for leading to that impact. You know, certainly we want to see some outcomes and great activities and opportunities for workshops, but we also want to build in this idea of long-term impact, sustainability, sort of the change we're trying to make in moving towards a regenerative tourism model. So really thinking about that localized aspect, you know, working with the communities is very key. Public-private partnerships are a very strong part of this. And that's the private sector to communities, to governance, all those pieces kind of working together. having a way to measure your impact. We'll talk about that a little later today. And then really showing some sort of concrete action. So these little sections will help you, think through your idea and build it out so that it reaches that innovative component we're looking for. And so another thing Diane went through last week was thinking about how does this translate into a project? Sometimes you have an idea, but then how do you formulate into something you can actually do? And that will fit into the amount of the award that is being offered under these Catalyst grants. So again, we're really looking for things that promote positive environmental and social change. And that's why it's key to really work with communities and have that integration between the two. And so not only restoration, but also regeneration, again, that improving in the long term. Acknowledging the interconnectedness between sectors. So this is that private-public partnership, the engagement with the community, really thinking about how all these pieces come together and work in a holistic manner. And that also ties into collaboration. A lot of these projects thrive when they work in multiple levels across many partnerships. And that's what we're here for as well. The NOAA team, the Ocean Foundation team, Local 2030, we're all here to work together collaboratively with the community of practice to help them thrive and find these possibilities. And again, this last statement, we'll come back to this many times throughout today's session, but looking at impact, not outcomes. So outcomes are a lead up to the impact, but we are really looking for that, innovation and impact. So reports are really important and informative, but we are looking for those things that are leading to that long-term change. All right, so I'll pause there to see if anyone has any questions or thoughts on the regenerative tourism angle, and if there's anything folks are thinking about. And yeah, Diane unfortunately is flying today, so she unfortunately couldn't be with us, but I'm sure if you have additional questions, she'd be happy to talk further with you. So anyone have any questions on the regenerative tourism aspect? All right, great. If you do jump in later on, that's perfectly fine. And you're always welcome to send an email as well if you want to follow up further. So the first thing we're going to do is look through the RFP very quickly. If you haven't had a chance to go online and look at this, we'll kind of walk through some of the key areas. And that it's important when you're putting together a proposal that you really do look at what the RFP is asking for. I often will review grants and there'll be some key part that they missed. And that really is heartbreaking because all this work went into the project, but then they missed some aspect that was requested. And it could be as simple as not including the letter, a support letter, or things of that nature. So there, we did design the RFP to make it easier for you to kind of go through as a checklist. So one of the key parts of this is being sure you review the theme areas we put together. So this was the list you'll see at the beginning of the RFP that kind of goes through the different areas that we're interested in finding projects to support. So we did try to give you a whole range of possibilities. You can cross between two. If you get into three, it gets a little more complicated because you might be dividing into too many directions. We will leave that up to you, but that's just a small observation I've had in working in multi-themed projects. So there's opportunities to think about how to bring the ideas of regenerative tourism with the industry. That's that private-public partnership. Thinking about food systems, especially in island countries where importing everything is a challenge from not just the carbon footprint, but from the realities of supply chains. So really thinking about ways food systems can thrive in a permaculture type possibility. Looking at seafood options, there's some really great projects out there that thrive on the local seafood, supporting the supply chain locally and promoting this within the tourism service providers. Thinking about nature-based climate solutions, including blue carbon. So we also support through NOAA another project on blue carbon, and this is very much focused on those blue carbon ecosystems, such as mangroves and seagrasses, and ensuring those ecosystems are intact and able to deliver that ecosystem service of blue carbon. So there's a lot of other nature-based solutions beyond just blue carbon, but we wanted to give that one as an option as well. So there's some really great opportunities to be able to bring in the climate lens and supporting a regenerative tourism project. Thinking about culture and heritage. There's always some interesting options out there for ensuring that that culture and heritage can continue to thrive and grow and be a learning opportunity for the visitors, as well as continuing to maintain that through the future generations. And then lastly, opportunities to engage with youth, women, underrepresented groups in a variety of ways, from outreach, from them being involved in the guiding aspects or heritage or cultural opportunities, and that learning experience back to the visitor. So these are just some of the different tracks. There are some examples we provided last week. Jason did a really great overview on some of these different projects that the Ocean Foundation has supported. Diane has some examples she gave as well. You're welcome to reach out if you're not sure what track yours fits into. We're happy to talk through that with you. And again, when we're together in Hawaii, if you're able to join us, we're also going to be doing some one-on-one discussions. So I'll take another pause there to see if anyone has any questions on those different tracks or anything they've been thinking about as they've started to read through these. Okay. And anyone at the Ocean Foundation want to share anything further on these before I jump into the actual RFP?
I'm all
Gabrielle,
set. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Andrea.
sorry, Ben.
Yeah, Andrea.
The Zoom, lovely parts of Zoom. No, I guess I am wondering if folks would be willing to maybe drop in the chat which one of these tracks they see as most lining up with the kinds of ideas they're starting to think about. Because I think we definitely drew from the last year's in-person communities of practice. And I'm just sort of curious to see where folks are sort of resonating with what we pulled out of that. But sorry, go ahead, Gabrielle.
Oh, no, Andrea, I think that's a great idea, actually. So folks have a idea they're bouncing around. We would love to see kind of which tracks you're starting to think about. And then Ben, I think you had also had a question, perhaps.
No question.
Oh.
Just kind of curious which tracks folks are gravitating towards.
Great minds think alike. Okay. All right, I don't see anything in the chat yet, but if folks want to be brave and share, or if there's any that scare you that you're not sure about, we'll also welcome that other feedback as well. All right, you could still think about it during the session. So climate has shown up. All right, we'll keep an eye on the chat there. All right, so the next thing we'll do is jump into the actual RFP. So that QR code should take you to the Ocean Foundation's webpage that they set up for this. And I will actually go to that. Sorry. Oh, let's see. That should take us there. Are you seeing the webpage? Can someone verify for me that it's switched?
Yes, it's
Switched.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sometimes I'm working on a laptop and it's hard sometimes to the small screens. So this is the landing page that you'll go to for the grant. And I just have to scroll down a little bit. So you'll see here all of our partners. So State Department, NOAA, the Local 2030 Network, and then of course the Ocean Foundation. And then there's a little bit of background on the project if you weren't sure kind of how all this came together. Gives you a bit of idea there. I'm going to scroll through this just a little faster. And then as I mentioned, this is part of a community of practice. And we have one very much focused on data and climate resiliency, and then the sustainable and regenerative tourism one. They do cross over a little bit, but these grants are very much focused on the regenerative tourism aspect. And both of these community of practices will be convening in April in Hawaii. And I'll mention that later on and give you more information on that as well. So we do have a PDF here that you can download that gives you some more information. And so I'm not going to open that right now because it'll slow down things, but that at least goes through sort of all the areas to think about and the different components that you'll need to submit, the various letters, budget, etc. And these grants are 5,000 to 15,000. We're shooting to give around 10 to 15 away. And this will be a 12-month project period. And then hopefully we'll be able to do a second round of these later in this calendar year or early next calendar year. And these are the thematic areas that we mentioned. So this is key. This is one thing that folks actually sometimes miss is the kind of eligible activities. So it's really important that you understand what activities you're planning on putting in for under this grant and that you are making sure they fit under this eligibility. If you're not sure, please do reach out to us. We're happy to, walk through that and have a discussion to make sure that you're aware of what can be included and what cannot be included. So needs assessment and gaps analysis, obviously that's a foundational component to getting some work done. An important part of that is we understand that needs assessments are the foundational piece, but we do also want to see a bit of how that will be used and applied. So do keep that in mind as well. Stakeholder engagement, including the community, private sector, et cetera. That's a really strong activity. Capacity building, volunteerism. So those are projects that are folks who travel to a region as a tourist, but they also do some volunteer work. So maybe they do mangrove planting or they do coral outplanting or fish surveys. There's a whole array of things they could do. Looking at tourism impact assessments, and then there's an implementation aspect to that as well on how to plan to reduce, and then implementing regenerative or sustainability components for hospitality or guest services. So you'll see in that longer form, there's some things that are not able to be covered, such as conference travel. That is a challenge for us. We can't really, the grants are so small that putting in for a couple $1,000s to travel to a conference gets to be a little challenging. So that's one that is something we're not really able to support. The purchase of a vehicle, for instance, is not something that would fall under these grants. So there is a list of things that we're not able to cover under this project. The other key thing to think about is eligibility and requirements. So we are limited to the following countries listed here. And so the last sentence is very important in that those organizations and the project work itself must be based in these islands as well and benefit the islands listed above. And this is the constraint of the funding that we've received. So we're not meaning to leave anybody out by any means, but it is just the nature of the funding that this is being supported under. So please reach out to us if you're not sure, especially on that last sentence, if you qualify or how it fits in the description of your project. So some important timelines. These are very key. Sometimes folks, they wait to the last minute to submit something and then they get some kind of internet glitch and they can't submit it on time. So we really would hope that you can avoid that and try and get it in a little earlier. I'm guilty. It's happened to me. I've done it. So I'm speaking from personal experience. So, if you have questions or issues or formatting challenges, maybe plan ahead of time to be sure that you can submit that without missing the deadline. So this is today's session right here, March 12th. Then again, we mentioned having a support session at the in-person meeting in April. The proposals are due at the end of June by Eastern Daylight Time. So that's towards midnight. And then we'll work together as a team to review them. And then we'll do announcements in mid-August with the hopes that projects could begin in September with that year-long project timeframe. All right, and then the apply link here will actually, Jason, I'll get to you 1 second, will actually take you to a Google form, which should make this a little easier as well. And embedded in that Google form are different components that you can upload. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just two things I wanted to note, both for our audience today, but also because we are recording the session. So on the themes where you mentioned sustainable and regenerative tourism, just because this came up during our last presentation, we understand that based on your location, those terms may have specific meanings for your community. And that's why they are both listed. So even though the theme of this is regenerative tourism, you can also explain if it is defined as sustainable tourism for your community. And then the other thing I wanted to note, if you scroll back down to and the deadlines and that kind of the timeline. So yes, thank you for reminding everyone that things always happen at the end. I did just want to reiterate from an Ocean Foundation perspective, like this is very important to us. We understand the need to have real-time troubleshooting. So Courtney is definitely the best person and is the point person, but Ben and I are also committed to backing her up as well. So we'll make sure you have our information. But if you're trying to submit you're getting any errors, you're having any frustration, like we are available as live humans, so to speak, to like get on a Zoom call, respond over email, but we want to make sure these do not become barriers for anyone to submit. So I just kind of wanted to reiterate that as well.
Great. Thank you, Jason, for that. And I would open the Google form, but again, I'm worried it's going to be a little glitchy, but do go and take a look at that and reach out to Courtney and the team if you're really having trouble with that. We were trying to make it as easy as possible for folks to submit, and we understand all the layers of tech and what kind of system you have, what kind of browser you use, and Google's not always friendly. And so again, as Jason reiterated, we really are trying to minimize those technological barriers and happy to assist you in any way we can, because the project is the most important thing here, is getting some good groundwork out there. So do reach out to us and let us know if we can help you in any way. But please don't wait till June 29th. That's the only recommendation I would give, because time zones, the Ocean Foundation, they work very hard, and I get emails from them at 2 a.m. But we want to be able to reach out to everybody who does need assistance. All right, so any other things on the RFP before we continue on with our session?
Gabrielle, I think that's actually a great point to note that all of these dates and sort of timelines, I'm assuming, and deadlines are based in Eastern time. So just checking against your time zone and making sure you know what those are. And I know that working across time zones can sometimes be tricky. So usually one of those converters is helpful for me, sort of the time zone converters.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make a comment too, just regarding the tracks and the types of projects. Of course, fundamentally, we have to make the linkage to tourism, right? And so, one potential suggestion would be to look at existing projects. Look at, a community group that's doing a mangrove restoration or seagrass or coral restoration, for instance, an area we work a lot in the Ocean Foundation, and see if you can, add value to that project, propose some type of kind of project that engages the local, tourism economy and brings those folks in to volunteer or do some other kind of activities, monitoring, direct restoration. All of these things can be forged through partnerships as well. So we'd really love to see that in the proposals that are submitted.
Great. All right, well, if we don't have any questions on the RFP itself, we'll move on to our next little session here. All right, and so we're going to give you some pointers. So I asked Scott to join us and put together some pointers, because he's definitely done some proposal reviews, and then I'll ask the Ocean Foundation team to also jump in and add any other pointers. These are just meant to give you some general things that we've noticed in reviewing proposals to kind of help you avoid those pitfalls that could hold you up and make things a little more challenging. So Scott, I'll pass it over to you, and you just let me know when to advance to the next slide.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gabrielle. Yeah, so these are pointers that I have kind of come across in my own personal experience, having reviewed a few grants before. And so these kind of from a reviewer's perspective might be helpful for you as you're preparing your proposal, and might make it a little bit more successful, especially when it comes down to reviewing them. So I think I have 11 pointers for you. Hopefully they're helpful. Probably the most important, or one of the most important things to know and to understand when writing a grant proposal generally is the reason that the grant fund was created, understanding the mission of the granting agency and the goals that the grant program is trying to achieve. Now, we just reviewed some of the RFP and information about regenerative and sustainable tourism, and that's a great place to start. But really understanding what are the goals of this grant program, and then writing your proposal to reflect that and to hit all those points. Really, you want to pitch your proposal and your project ideas to sell what you want to do to be a good fit for the goals of the grant program. So that's kind of the most important thing, is you don't want to miss any of those marks. You want to make sure that you're actively responding to those grant goals. Number 2 is reading the proposal instructions and following them. As Gabrielle said, You wouldn't believe how common it is to receive proposals that don't follow the instructions that are given in the RFP, or maybe miss a big section of it. So it's really important that you read over the RFP fully, read over the requirements, and then follow them as precisely as you can. For example, a lot of RFPs have page limits, they have word counts, they request certain font sizes, and lots of other random formatting requests. And it's really important to respect all of those requests. That makes it easier on the RFP reviewers and also shows the reviewers that you're taking this very seriously. Also, don't omit anything without a clear explanation as to why you might not be answering a certain question in the way that they want you to. Just make sure that you're following the instructions as closely as you can. Number 3 is use plain language. Don't use any jargon. That can be hard to do, especially if you're used to using certain jargon within your organization or within your community. But it's likely that the grant reviewers are not going to understand exactly what you're talking about. So a good kind of rule of thumb is to approach your proposal and write it so that the person that is reviewing it can understand it, even if they have no idea what your organization is or your community or what your project is. I should be, as a reviewer, I should be able to pick up your proposal, read it, and understand it completely and have it make perfect sense. So try to avoid that jargon that might complicate things. It's also really important to check for spelling, for grammatical mistakes, and math errors, especially when you're looking at your budget. Go over those numbers multiple times to make sure they're accurate and reflect actually what you want in your proposal. It can be really embarrassing to mess something tiny up like that can have a big impact on the success of your proposal. And also try to make it an interesting read. A lot of times reviewers are reviewing a lot of proposals, and ones that aren't as interesting or engaging can kind of fall to the bottom of the pack or be a little bit forgotten. So try to make them engaging or exciting or innovative. And I know innovation is really important in this RFP request as well. So it's more likely just to kind of stick in the back of a reviewer's mind or catch their attention if they're a little bit more engaging and interesting. You can go to the next slide. Next is be specific. This is a really important one. It's a good idea to give as many details as you can about your project. The more details you have, the more the reviewer will be able to understand your vision for it, what you're hoping to accomplish. So if you have specific details to give, please do give those specific details. A lot of times, maybe the project is in the early stages and you don't have all of the answers as specifically as you might want. And that's okay, you can address that. But any specifics, any details that you do have, it's a good idea to add them to your proposal. On what goes along with that is also being very concise. There's a lot to read, there's a lot to write, there's a lot to go over. So try to make your proposal as concise as possible while also kind of maintaining that specificity that is really important. And that can kind of be a tough thing to balance. But generally reviewers don't want to read kind of a rambling proposal. Try to narrow it down and be as concise as you possibly can. You want to give information that's important and relevant to your grant, and you don't want to waste time and space on anything that directly isn't tied to your project that you're proposing. Next is be familiar with the funding history. This can be really helpful, and I think someone was just mentioning this. Review projects that are happening in your community or within your organization, or projects that have been awarded before in the past or similarly awarded. I know that there are a number of really great innovative regenerative tourism projects that are happening on islands around the world right now. So you can look at those for inspiration for your project. And also, if there have been awards given in the past, you can go back, review those, and often you can find the tone, like the writing tone or certain language that was used to help make that proposal successful. And that can be helpful to kind of apply that to your proposal as well. Understand the evaluation criteria. This is really important. I think there's 6 parts to the criteria. The criteria is how your proposal is going to be evaluated and basically graded by the reviewers. And I know that for this proposal, reviewers are going to be looking at the impact on local or national tourism in support of regenerative tourism. We're going to be looking at the feasibility of the project itself. We're looking at the sustainability of the project post-award, but also the transferability, something that Andrea was commenting on earlier. We're also going to be looking at community involvement, innovation, and then how you're going to be sharing your lessons or results of your project afterwards. So that's all within the RFP, but it's really important to consider those as you're preparing and writing your proposal. Have someone from outside of your organization read your proposal to make sure that it makes sense. This is a really important one. It's really easy to do. Just have some extra eyes that isn't familiar with your project or really your organization review it. And if they're confused, it means that you might need to make things more specific or explain things in a different way. So that can be really helpful, just getting a different set of eyes on your proposal. And lastly, ask questions. That's a really important thing. It's a really basic thing to consider. And I know that there's going to be many opportunities for questions. You can reach out to Courtney right now at the Ocean Foundation if you have questions. But there's also our support session coming up in April, where we're going to be talking about this grant opportunity specifically. And I believe that Gabrielle even said that potentially we're looking at scheduling some office hours for Q&A sessions where you might be able to go over draft ideas. I think there's lots of opportunity for that. And that's really, really helpful. If you're not sure of how your idea fits in with this proposal, ask us about it. Talk it through. That's what this is. This session is kind of for, but we're also going to have more opportunities in the future to go over that as well. So those are just some ideas that I have had from having reviewed several proposals in the past. But I would like to hear if our Ocean Foundation colleagues have any ideas, or even anybody from NOAA, if you have anything to add.
These were great, Scott. Thank you for putting them together. I'll add that I think that something that is very unique to the Local 2030 Islands Network is the actual network. So I would definitely look to the network and to your peers in the communities of practice for sources of inspiration, for case studies, looking at sort of the work that's being conducted in places that might be similar to yours or very different, but like very much dealing with similar issues or pioneering similar approaches to what you want to pioneer. So definitely looking at the community of practice and leveraging that as a source of inspiration for this work, I think would be a really nice place to start. And very much using the platforms of the community of practice to do that.
Great, thanks, Andrea and Scott. Anything from the Ocean Foundation to add? And Jason just put the link into the community of practice for those of you that might not yet be familiar with it.
No, nothing on our end. Just a reminder, if you want to bounce off ideas off us, feel free to contact us anytime, and we're happy to kind of provide some support and guidance as you kind of brainstorm different proposal ideas.
Fantastic. Okay. All right, we'll continue on. So I put together just a couple things which are sort of the key foundational parts to putting together a project. And so the first thing we'll sort of talk about is the goal or objective writing. I'm not going to get too buried in semantics today, because you can go down a whole rabbit hole talking about the difference between all these. But Diane and I had a conversation about 2 types of objectives that are out there in sort of the ether in terms of thinking about how to formulate your initial foundational component. So in a lot of the management planning that the NOAA International Capacity Building Project does, we think about SMART objectives because we are very much thinking about sort of scientific MPA management aspects. And so the SMART objectives really fit to that quite well because they're often, doing monitoring of biophysical properties. And so that it has a little different spin on it. So if you're familiar with the SMART objectives, they're these objectives that take into consideration the specificity, being very specific about what you're looking to do. You can actually measure the change. You can actually get it done. It's realistic, relevant to what you're trying to do management wise. And there's a time element to it. So this is, you probably have seen these out there. They very much align with a management sort of mindset. But Diane and I had a conversation and she mentioned the PACT objectives. And this is out of the NEST laboratories. And there's a link, I think I show it a little bit later. I also think this is a very good way to think, and this is very applicable to this type of catalyst grant in that we're looking at sort of this impactual. So the mindset through a PACT objective is working towards a purposeful innovation and impact for the long-term sustainability. Not to say the SMART objectives don't get there, but the SMART objectives are very much tied to a time-bound element. I want to accomplish this in 3 years. I want to accomplish this in 5 years, and then you revise them in the next management plan, right? So there's an adaptive management component to it where it builds off each other step by step, but it does have sort of these starts and stops built into it a little bit, while the PACT objectives are sort of a little more open in that time element. So are we going to grade you in any way on how you write this? No, absolutely not. It's just to give you some guidance on how to think through a process. So just to compare the two, you can see that the SMART objectives have much more specific elements to it. And the PACT kind of leaves things a little more open and leading towards sort of a longer term vision. So the example the NEST Labs gives is that SMART objectives tend to focus on an outcome. And if you remember back to the very beginning of our discussion, Diane very clearly mentioned in the guiding elements that we're not looking at outcomes necessarily. We're very much focused on impact. So that's how these two goals sort of diverge a bit. And in her presentation last week, she shared this really great graphic. I think it does reflect an adaptive management approach if you're thinking from a management perspective, in that, you do refine and adapt and make some change. But it is very much focused on sort of this long-term catalyst approach. So again, we don't want you to get buried in the semantics of the difference between the two. It's just to give you something to sort of help formulate your ideas and moving towards that innovation part. I think that of anything might scare people the most is, oh my gosh, I have to be innovative. Again, we're not meaning to make that a harsh word to have to work around, but, really, work in your mind how your project kind of leads into this longer term impact. So just to give an example of what these two might look like, this is from the NEST Lab. So if you Google PACT objectives, it'll take you to the NEST Lab. So I want to see if you can figure out which is which. All right. So one of these is a PACT example, and one of these is a SMART example. So the first one says to get 5,000 subscribers in 25 weeks. So this is related to a newsletter. So very generic kind of example. And the second one is to publish 25 newsletters over the next 25 weeks. So the first one, how many of you, let's see, we'll do it in the chat. If you think, put PACT or SMART, for which one you think this one is. Get 5,000 subscribers in 25 weeks. I should have set up a voting mechanism in Zoom, but I wasn't that savvy. So if folks just want to put a quick little note in the chat to let me know which one you think this first one is. All right, we have a vote for SMART, PACT, SMART. Okay, I'll wait for a few more to come in. Okay, all right, let's see. Hopefully my animation did not work. Oh, that's a bummer. I worked so hard on that. Shoot. All right, let me go back. I don't know why it didn't transfer into Google. Okay, so the first one is a pact. And the key thing in there is the subscriber part of it. So because you're going to get actual, you're going to have people looking at it. The second one is a smart, but it doesn't necessarily reflect any sort of impact. All you know is that you've published that number of newsletters, but it doesn't really, you don't really know, okay, I got 25 newsletters out in 25 weeks, but who did they reach? Did anybody read them? All you did was publish them. So you accomplished something, definitely, but the first one gives you that sort of next level that you're actually physically reaching the subscriber. So that's the difference between those. Okay, so go to the Nest Labs and read up a bit more about it. And again, we're not trying to bog you down in getting the semantics right. We just want you to sort of think about, if you change your objective, your goal just a little bit, you can actually reflect that impactful element to it. Okay, so the next part we're going to go into is thinking about the monitoring impact. So it's important when you're putting together these sorts of projects to really be able to track what you're accomplishing. And so this is something we've spent a lot of time thinking about. It's a large part of projects. I think in my projects, we actually don't spend enough time on it. I wish we did. We really need to build in a larger budget and staff time to look at this in greater detail. And in the capacity building world, it's particularly challenging to really know, did the workshop I deliver, like this one, did it make a difference? Did it help people? What'd they do with it? And that's something I struggle with every day, is trying to, really be conscientious of making sure the things we design and deliver are, helping folks in their everyday work and making a change that they're wanting to do. So just a few pointers out of this is, monitoring this is very basic. You're tracking things. You're looking at what got done, how many workshops you delivered, how many tour operators you engaged with. But we really want to take this up. If we're looking at impact, we really want to kick this into the next level, which is looking at the indicators and looking at, these things that actually show how we're making a bit of change. And then the last part of it is sort of this learning component. And that really pulls in that long-term sustainability aspect, is where is it going next? You'll often see, they're MEL plans. That's what we call these. And the learning component was added a little more recently in these projects. And the same thing in our management planning work. We really are thinking about the learning component. Where can things go next? How can they be applied and adapted and utilized? So that's sort of, one way to start thinking about, as you're moving into that innovative mindset, is how will things continue onward, the long-term sustainability. We recognize this is a small amount of funding. It is a one-year project, but it is important to think through, where could it go next? And having that sky's the limit mindset can be super helpful when you're just starting to get, a little piece going. It'll help you kind of be motivated and give you some ideas on how to build it. And you can, build greater partnerships for future collaborations. It's amazing how small projects can really thrive and become something so much bigger. And I'm sure the Ocean Foundation, you have some great examples in your work as well. And we've seen it in a small grants program we offer in our management planning work. We've watched those $5,000 grants take off and become these incredible outreach programs, management planning trainings that were taken on by the host countries, et cetera. So a small little seed can go a long way, which is why we're calling these Catalyst grants. So a few things to think about when you're monitoring the progress of this project. And again, monitoring plans sounds a little arduous and it's a lot, but it's really not meant to be. It's just a way for you to think about how you're going to track your progress and show, that you are leading towards that change and innovation. So you usually have one sort of thing you're tracking per goal or objective. Sometimes there's more, but you can keep it as simple as you need to. The most important thing is that it really reflects the movement of that towards that goal. You want to be sure that whatever you're tracking is really reflecting that you're reaching that goal, or how that goal is having an impact. So sometimes you have to prioritize what you can actually monitor and track based on how much funding you have. Again, this is a very small grant project, so you can't go out and do, a full scale satellite tracking data analysis of a mangrove area necessarily. So you want to be able to really think about, what will help you track the goals that are under this particular set of funding. And then you want to think about the methods and how you're going to collect that information. Again, some methodology can be very expensive. So really thinking about ways to leverage maybe other work, leverage data that's already being collected by another organization. And just thinking about ways, if you don't have a lot of funding to monitor things, how can you be creative with that? And then also being sure that you actually track who is going to do it, how often it's going to do it, when you're going to accomplish that, and having that ahead of time. Sometimes we forget this part of our projects, and then you can't go backwards. So, making sure you're really being mindful of that. For instance, if you're doing a capacity building aspect, really thinking about when you have those folks together with you in your workshop, what kind of information can you get from them when they're with you? How are they going to apply this later? Because it's hard to go back and get that perceptions once they're out of the room with you. And so being able to think through that and plan ahead of time is really key. And then, I just wanted to give you kind of an idea of a sample indicator, very simple. So I work in capacity building, and we're often only asked to tell our funders how many people came to our workshop. And that's great. And that's important. We want to know how many people we reach. But for me personally, from a capacity development standpoint, I want to know what they got out of the workshop. What did they do with the information? So we work very hard to develop evaluation tools and have perception conversations and follow up in order to be able to track how folks made use of the training and tool that we gave them, as well as how to improve it, how to tailor it for future audiences, how to, add additional things to it. So what we'll often do is put together a set of process indicators that are more for us, because sometimes our funders don't require it, but we'll look and track how a tool was used. So maybe we introduced a rapid vulnerability assessment in a training or some other kind of tool, and we'll ask those folks in a few months how they used it. Even at the end of our workshops, we'll often ask, what do you plan to do next? What's your goal in the next 6 months with the information you learned? And that's very valuable to us because it helps us kind of see what were the key takeaways with the group we were working with. And then we can actually plan future support to help engage with them in the longer term. So it does just take a little bit, of time to work through how to collect this data and have it have a more meaningful track in the long run. So a few takeaways regarding indicators is, going as simple as possible. Again, not getting too fancy. I'm a scientist. I love to collect as much data as I possibly could, but the reality is time, money, and resources. And so really being able to think about what are the things you can track that are going to show the change you're working towards. And so, there's a minimum you're going to work for. Again, we're not trying to just, check a box, but really thinking consciously about what kind of data do we really need. So that last one is really important, not to collect data for the sake of having it, to say, look, I have all this information. Oh, it doesn't really tell me how well I'm doing on this particular objective in this funding stream. So it is really important to tie the information you're collecting, that it is being informative to the objectives and goals that you've set forth under a certain project. So just be mindful of that. All right, so any questions on indicators so far? I just want to make sure if folks have any thoughts. Okay. All right, so just a few minor recommendations. Again, I already mentioned keeping it simple, focusing on what's essential, what kind of information will really tell you how well you're doing in the specific project and the goals identified under that project. You can also look to collecting, using data from others. Maybe there's a school group or a tourist group or a private sector that's already going out and doing this monitoring that you can make use of, and just be able to, access that data and be able to utilize it as well. And again, the idea of looking at how what you're tracking is going to show the impact of the activities that you've identified. And then there's a few more things, incorporating it into what you're already doing. As I mentioned, one thing we'll do in our capacity building work is building it into our workshop. So we'll actually collect data. Andrea did that earlier, right? She went and asked, oh, tell us what tracks you're thinking about. That was actually a little evaluative mechanism for this work that we're doing. So you can really kind of build it into things you're already doing. If you're doing stakeholder engagement activities or surveys, thinking about, oh, what other information could I collect while I have these folks with me? That way you're leveraging the time you have with them. You're not, wasting their time by having to follow up later. Also, it makes it easier on you because you've already have them together. And so making use of that opportunity that's in front of you at the moment. Less frequent monitoring sometimes is necessary if you can't get out there, as regularly as you would like because of funding or time or storm patterns, whatever it may be. Having some information is important. So you just have to sort of plan a bit for the situation. Again, doing low cost qualitative ideas also can help. There's some very creative ideas out there about how to do monitoring on certain things without having to go out and do this crazy, very elaborate scientific monitoring, water quality surveys, et cetera, that might be outside of the scope and time of the project that you're going to put together for this grant. So we're happy to help with these. So please reach out and we can give you some ideas. And the last one, again, gives you an opportunity to engage with the local community and volunteers to help with monitoring. In a lot of the management planning work that we do, those groups we work with, they go out and they engage with school groups, soccer teams, tourists, and they get some monitoring data from that. And that data can be incredibly valuable. So just thinking about getting creative. Again, that's part of the innovative side to this grant process. All right, so that's the last bit I have on monitoring. So I just want to see if anyone has any questions before I move on from there. And I welcome Scott, Andrea, Ocean Foundation, if you want to add anything to that as well from your experiences. Okay. We have a question on examples of recommended data from prior grant programs. I'll look to my Ocean Foundation colleagues for this one, perhaps from some of their regenerative tourism work. For the things that I work on, they're very much scientific, long-term management planning projects. So I don't have a specific one I could share with you at this point. I think, Lee, it would be very much tailored to the kind of project you're going to do. But Jason raised his hand, so I'm going to let him chime in. He might have some examples to share.
Yeah, well, I want to make sure I also give Ben a chance to answer this because as the manager of the Blue Resilience Initiative for the Ocean Foundation, I think he's probably got the best view on this. I just wanted to follow up from some of the presentation I gave last week, which was, and Ben kind of alluded this too, there are traditional tourism projects in which you're working with the Tourism Bureau or you're working with tour operators, and those projects are welcome. And I think those outcomes and impacts are very easily definable, right? Are we getting the same kind of visitation at the thing the tour operators are managing, right? But the examples I gave were not traditional tourism projects. They were actually restoration projects that then directly benefited regenerative tourism principles. And so to think about that, it doesn't have to be a traditional, air quotes, tourism project, but it could be something that if you're successful is going to benefit tourism. And so the example in Vieques was restoring the mangroves in the bioluminescent bay directly impacts and benefits tourism because the local economy depends on a healthy bay. Tourists from around the world depend on a healthy bay. So even though the project is focused on restoration, it affects tourism. With sargassum, it was about removing something that is negatively impacting tourism, in which people are choosing not to visit these places because they're inundated with sargassum. And so could we alleviate that? So I guess for this, to think about the outcomes and impacts of, at the end of the day, what is the problem you're trying to address? How does your project move the needle? Doesn't have to totally solve, but how does it lessen that burden or help achieve the type of regenerative tourism you want to see happen, whether or not it's a traditional tourism project? Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to establish some linkage to the tourism industry. Certainly, I think one of the best examples currently ongoing is just the relationship between one of our partners in Puerto Rico and Vieques and the tourism operators that operate within the biobay that Jason had mentioned. One of the Vieques Conservation and Historical Trust's main objectives has been to kind of build capacity within that sector, as well as help manage number of guests or number of participants out on the water at any given moment, raise awareness of the benefits of restoration projects and the coastal ecosystems in general. So I think establishing those linkages is really important to kind of catalyze this idea of more regenerative tourism that actively engages that sector. So, at a minimum, identifying maybe the number of operators that you worked with and kind of the nature, the content of the training that you provided could be more of an output type measurement. But I think, looking at their perspectives on the work and how it has given them new kind of dimensions to discuss with their guests, I think that speaks more to the impact, right? Where the guests are not only experiencing the brightest bioluminescent bay in the world, but they're understanding how the brightness, the magic, the magicalness or magical nature of that bay is fundamentally connected to its health, right? And how, as tourists, they can directly contribute to that and be a part of that regeneration.
Great, thank you, Ben and Jason, for sharing that. And then Chris just had a question about the proposal being in the form of collaboration with our existing projects. And so we had talked about, being able to, expand off of something that's already in process. Perhaps not an exact duplication, but a way to sort of leverage and expand on portions of it. I don't know if anyone from the Ocean Foundation or Andrea would like to add any more to that to help Chris. Okay. All right, so the last little bit I have today is just a schematic I put together yesterday to help my brain organize the different thoughts in this. And so hopefully this will help you kind of work through the flow of how to come up with an innovative idea. And so coming from a regenerative perspective, you start with some ideas that formulate into actions, and those actions lead to some sort of change. And that's the sort of the innovation tract we're looking for. So if you want to think about the idea in those SMART objectives versus the PACT objectives, where SMART was focused more on the outcome, while PACT takes it to sort of the next level of impact. And you can see PACT is actually in the word there. That's how I remember it. This might help you sort of mentally work through the flow. So all projects start with goals. They have some sort of activities. Those activities give you some level of outputs, whether it's a workshop, a workshop report, a new tool, planted some new mangroves. So that's all, great to have. But then you want to take it into the next level where it leads into some sort of results and learning, because that helps evolve into that sort of long-term sustainability side of things that really does support the regenerative idea. And those are sort of your outcomes. So that's the first level, though. And if you remember, the SMART objectives kind of end here. They kind of go in this shorter term continuum. We're really looking more into sort of the spiral that Diane showed in her graphic in explaining the impactual level we're shooting for. So that takes us into this next layer, which is sort of heading towards the treasure chest. And I think about any sort of impact and positive change that we can make is very much something to treasure and really work towards in trying to build sort of this long-term, concept that can last for generations. So the idea of rejuvenating a bioluminescent bay is incredible, because if anyone who's experienced that really is a jewel and a treasure of to have something that we can bring back to life and have around for generations to come, and that the community and the tourists alike benefits from. So that's sort of how I think about the treasure. Is the impact is really something that we're striving for, that will help us in the long run. So hopefully this graphic kind of gives you a mental seascape to work off of. And it's not meant to confuse you. I hope it does kind of give you an idea of how to work through an idea a little bit. All right, well, that was all I really had for today to help folks sort of get a foundation laid for thinking about ideas for this grant. And I'll open the floor up to anybody that has questions or thoughts or things you might still need help with that we didn't get to today. And then we'll close out for today's session. So if you have a question, you're welcome to come off mute, raise your hand, or drop it in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable with.
Hello, Stefano here from Fiji. Am I coming through?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm sorry, I did join a little bit late, so I'm not sure if I understood or got all the information about eligibility. I do work for an NGO, a charitable trust, and we do work with indigenous communities in some island settings, and we are definitely at this stage working on a variety of different community-based and led tourism initiatives. My question is, would it be possible if our application would be together with some community group whereby they might be the recipient, or would it have to be that the NGO like ourselves would need to manage it all on behalf of? Thank you.
I'll let one of our Ocean Foundation colleagues answer that.
Yeah, so I guess it's important that the funding goes to a recipient country that's listed on the RFP. What's the nature of the entity that you're working with, or is it kind of just community members generally and not a formal organization?
All right, so this is in Fiji, which is under the list of the eligible countries. I do work for an NGO, a registered charitable trust, operating in Fiji, registered here and in the US. The targeted group would be a registered cooperative, what's a local registration, or could be just a group of community members, which do not necessarily have a formal recognized membership or registration.
Yeah, well, if the key is that the recipient organization or individual even is based in that country, right? So if your NGO has greater capacity to manage this award, it's critical that it has a presence directly in the country as well. And if that's the case, that I think that's perfectly eligible. What we're trying to avoid is, a perhaps, US based organization operating in one of these countries, but not, isn't actually a recipient based in the country. The funding, mandates that the money must go to these, these eligible countries directly.
Okay, hopefully that you got your answer there. Ruth, I see you have your hand up. If you want to come off mute and go ahead.
Hi, good night. I'm from Antigua and Barbuda. One of the greatest challenges is the level of waste that is generated. Everything is imported into the islands. You have the packaging. After the packaging, the products, and they go to a landfill. And the impact on the soils, the water, the air, everything but the waste that's generated from tourism is very, very high. And I did not see any of your themes address waste. And it has to, regenerative tourism has to be linked with waste. That's just an observation.
Well, I'll
Well,
just say
yeah,
thank you for that, Ruth. That is a great observation. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
yeah, and Ruth, it's Ben. I'm great to see you on this webinar. I miss you from Hawaii. I think you're right. Explicitly it does not mention waste, but that could certainly be interwoven in, I think, many of the tracks. All right. Just your ability to kind of connect that to tourism. Now, of course, tourism is generating a lot of that waste. So, coming up with a plan to minimize that, in collaboration with a resort or a municipality, that could be an eligible activity, right? That I think would fall under one, certainly. One is sustainable and regenerative tourism, just the broader thematic area, I think is fairly all encompassing on activities like that. And of course, if you're working with youth or women or underrepresented groups, that could fall under 6 as well. But if you have like a specific proposal idea, if you want to run that by us, we're happy to kind of help fit it within the appropriate track.
And yes, and that is a great suggestion. One other thing I'll say, Ruth, is that I think your recommendation to be more intentional about this to encourage more projects for future opportunities is a good one. For your specific project, of course, we'd want to learn more about that. In addition to the program tracks, number one, if you look at eligible activities, if the project is about impact assessment and planning to reduce impact, and plastic waste is part of the reduction, that would also align with eligible activities. So I think we can be more intentional about this as like a good feedback, but I also think depending on your project, you would likely qualify as well. But yeah, please let us know.
Okay, and I see Melanie had her hand up next.
Hi, good evening. I'm Melanie Macturk from Guyana. So we are not an island. And so, and one of the projects that yes, we are in the list. One of the projects that is sort of spinning around in my head would be around a wetland area and could potentially involve mitigating impacts of overfishing on key spawning areas. Now, as much as it might fit under underrepresented groups because it is in indigenous communities, I'm wondering, would it also potentially fit under the item category theme 3, though that specifically says sea food versus aquatic species used for food? I'm just wondering.
I think it might be better.
This is the very first time I am having any engagement with this, and I do apologize for my utter ignorance.
No, I think it's a totally valid question. And, that's going to be one of our challenges overall is, some ideas don't fit neatly in one single tract, right? And we've set that up just more than anything to provide guidance and to help folks kind of narrow down on an idea. But if it's crossing tracks, I think that's certainly fine. In your specific case, it might fit best under 4, right? And that could be a nature-based solution. But it depends, and I don't think we have specific quota. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gabrielle, but quota for each tract. This is really just more to provide an outline of the types of, kind of activities, the types of proposals that we're looking for, but we're not going to necessarily, distribute them evenly among those categories, depending on the strength of those respective proposals.
Yes, we just wanted to give some ideas to folks because we felt like helping kind of encompass a suite of things and reaching for that innovation can be a challenge. So it was more for inspirational purposes. But yes, Ben, correct. My understanding is we're not doing a quota system of any way. It'll be the best of the best.
Thank you. And again, just because I'm very uncomfortable and I haven't had time to really familiarize myself with the details, the fact that the area that I'm considering is in no way associated with the sea or oceans or any sort of salt water.
Yeah, well, we of course are the Ocean Foundation. We focus exclusively on the ocean kind of coastal environment. This specific RFP though is broader. It really is, and those specific countries are those that are related to a funding arrangement with the U.S. Department of State. So if you are in that country, we are open to ideas that are not necessarily coastal based. Of course, Local 2030 Islands Network is really focused on islands. This RFP, is technically more broad than that, and is really supporting regenerative tourism writ large in the countries that are eligible. Now, we love ocean ideas though too, of course. So feel free to submit those.
All right, and Melanie, all the sessions were recorded, so you're welcome to go back. I think the links are on the Ocean Foundation webpage, so you can go back and review them at any time. All right, and Christina, you had your hand up as well?
Yes, thank you so much, Gabriel, and very sorry that I just joined the session. But just a question from me. I'm from the Pacific Tourism Organization, and we have 20 Pacific Island member countries. We understand that some of our members will be very interested in taking up the opportunity to apply directly for funding. But as a regional organization that works across multiple countries, is there opportunity for SBTO to submit a proposal on behalf of a few of the countries that are eligible? We are based in Fiji.
I think my understanding, Ben, or Andre, anyone jump in, but my understanding is you're based in Fiji, so that does give you eligibility. And then as long as the project you're supporting is, within Fiji or one of the countries also listed in the eligibility list. So the work itself has to be accomplished in the eligibility list as well. I just want to make sure. Did I explain that correctly, Ben and folks?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's correct. Sorry, I was replying to Stefano.
Oh, that's
let me
okay.
know
Yeah,
if
I know we got a few
doesn't make
messages
sense.
going on. Go ahead, Ben, if you want to add anything to that.
No, not at this time.
Okay, perfect. Great. Does that help you?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Gabby, and I'll definitely be in touch again if there's any questions. Just wanted to point out that some of our countries are very small, and their tourism offices are very small. So in terms of the reporting requirements on this funding, they'd appreciate support from us at the regional level, but definitely our countries are listed. Not all of them, but they are listed, and all the implementation will be in those countries. Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, we understand sometimes having an umbrella organization can be very helpful to smaller groups who maybe can't take on certain tasks and things. So we welcome you providing that support to them. But please do reach out directly to the team if we can help you dive into that a little more deeply. All right, great. Thank you. All right. And I think Ben and folks were answering the questions in the chat. So I think Stefano, we answered some things for you. I'm just making sure there's anyone else in here. And Rayati from Kiribati is asking if we could share some successful grant proposals as guidance. So I don't know, Ben and team, if you have some examples you would share. This is a new grant proposal process for us. So we kind of wrote this from scratch a bit. So we don't have ones for this one to share.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any kind of generic successful proposals, nor could we share a successful one from the past for privacy reasons. But I would suggest, as long as you're following the instructions, this is a brand new opportunity. So we're going to be very flexible and open-minded as far as, our considerations. And we're really looking for projects that, meet a lot of the criteria that we've laid forward in the RFP, as well as some of the guidance that's been provided. So we're happy to review items too and provide, some feedback. Of course, we can't provide like a pre-review of your proposal prior to submission, but once again, if you just have questions about whether your idea fits within these criteria, we're more than happy to provide some feedback on that.
So Raiti, I don't know if you're going to be able to join us in Hawaii. I have the dates up there for that. We will be doing some peer-to-peer sessions and providing sort of a little more of that foundational discussion. If you're not able to, again, as Ben mentioned, we're happy to give you some guidance. We did really work very hard. Courtney worked very hard on putting together the Google form to make it very easy for you to do your proposal in sections and think about it. So we really did try to help as best we could to make it easier. And then some of the pointers we gave today as well. So if you didn't get a chance to watch the session from last week, that is recorded, and there were some ideas there as well. So hopefully that will give you a lot of groundwork information to help you with the process. All right. Oh, Richard, go ahead.
Hi, kia ora tātou, mabuhay. Yeah, my name is Richard. I'm originally from the Philippines, but based in New Zealand. Some of my questions were clarified before. I'll be working with some organizations in the Philippines on the Regenerative Tourism Project. My apologies, I missed the first part of the session. I just mixed up the time zones. But I'm looking at the criteria for judging the applications. And innovation, as showed in the last slide and in the call for applications, innovation is one key criteria. However, as we know, innovation can be quite broad and subjective. And so I am assuming that the innovativeness of the project should be rooted in the local context that we're trying to change and regenerate. Was my impression correct?
I think the more you bring in the local context, the better. And innovative, yes, that is, words can be very challenging. Sometimes the definition, as we already talked about, regenerative and sustainable in the context can, have different meanings. I think we're looking for things that, really are working towards that impact, towards that change, not just another monitoring and, things like that. So really, we are really trying to have this be a catalyst, that spark that bridges to something greater. That may sound like a grand vision, but I think that's what comes to mind for me when we're talking about innovative. And I'm going to welcome the team to jump in, Andrea, Samantha, and the Ocean Foundation, if they want to add to their thoughts on that too. But coming from my conversations with Diane Dredge in the collaborative lab, that was sort of where the innovative side of thinking was kind of coming to the surface.
Yeah, I think local context matters extraordinarily. But above all, some things, like, for instance, the Ocean Foundation is working with partners throughout the Caribbean on turning sargassum strandings into organic compost. There's nothing necessarily innovative about composting, which has been around for thousands of years. But in many ways, kind of looking at traditional cultural practices, more low intensive practices, that can be innovative in the context of a local economy and the direction it's headed. So, bringing back indigenous knowledge in many ways is very innovative, especially if the economy is going in a different direction, or the tourism industry is going in a different direction.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for clarifying that and for providing those examples. And we really appreciate these information sessions that you provide. My next question is also for the call, that PDF embedded in the website. There's this section about criteria for evaluating the grants, the applications, proposal evaluation, the last page on page 6. it says proposals will be evaluated on the following criteria. And there are 6 bullet points. Will there be any point allocation or some kind of a rubric that could be that you're planning to provide potential applicants so that they can, look at how their ideas fit in the judging criteria?
Richard, we, as our team, we haven't gotten to that conversation yet. I think we wanted, we're going to sit down and sort of think about how we're going to do the evaluation part. And I did put those bullets together ahead of time for the purpose of giving some folks guidance, but I don't think we've gotten so far yet as to how we'll allocate those out yet. I'm not opposed to giving that out. I don't know, Ben and team, what you think about that in your experience. Obviously, you're, the fiscal agent for this, so I don't want to overstep anything here, but we just haven't put it together that detailed yet.
Yeah, I will say, Richard, and often a lot of, for instance, U.S. federal competitions, that rubric is, provided ahead of time. In this case, I think the key here is that we're not going to stress a completely quantitative kind of assessment, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to score these kind of in a vacuum, right? And I think the nature of this work and the proposals that you're pulling together doesn't necessarily lend itself to a very quantitative scoring system. I think largely it'll be qualitative based off the expertise that we bring together in the reviewing committee. And I think it's going to draw from a lot of different backgrounds, and it will be difficult to score from, let's say from a 1 to 5 point, perspective. Above all, though, we want to be transparent. So if we do develop some type of more formal rubric like this, I certainly think we can share that with you. But I think the nature of the idea, its context, the partnerships that are being brought together, how compelling it is, I think that's going to matter much more in the end. And that will ultimately come down to kind of the subjective evaluation of our various judges.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, team. Yeah, I'm just curious because, different funding agencies have different criteria and different processes. And yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I think it's really good to get that approach. Thank you.
All right, we're almost at time. And Samantha, I want to give you the floor as well. So please go ahead.
Thanks, Gabrielle, and thanks all for your questions. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Sam, and I'm the managing director of the Local 2030 Islands Network. And for those less familiar with Local 2030, the network itself is a peer-to-peer network anchored in local solutions for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So Richard, much to your question about how localized should these grants or should the applications be, right? I think the more local, the better. And much of the work that the network is doing through the tourism community of practice and through our other communities of practice as well are sharing these solutions, but also in the storytelling of these solutions. So a reminder that while what might seem obvious to you in the work that you're doing, the more that you can convey that in the story that you're telling and the narrative that you're doing or that you're writing, the better I think it will be. And that the context that you're giving will be so helpful for the rest to understand. To Ruth's point earlier about circular economies and all of that, we often share that islanders and islands in general are the originators of the circular economy and the integrators of the SDGs, right? Like how much better the world would be if we all thought like islanders. And while we all know that there's no tourism specific SDG, there are many different components that I'm assuming that these applications, these grants, proposals will have tethered together. So if you're able to kind of put on the SDG lens that the Local 2030 Islands Network is anchored and rooted in, that would also be really helpful, while of course giving the local context there, right? So thinking with that global scope of what are the challenges that you're working to solve and what is the local context that you're bringing to it, and crafting the narrative there. And then that will of course be merged really nicely in the tourism community of practice that is bringing together all of those different approaches and techniques and stories from across our different consortium of partners and community members and experts from across the world. So just my 2 cents, and really looking forward to seeing and meeting and being in conversation with you all moving forward. So I'll put my email in the chat, and of course Diane's, who's the Tourism Community of Practice Coordinator as well, in case we can further these conversations and be in community in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thanks.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank our extensive team for the support tonight. This is always a team effort, and we appreciate that. And it was great, the discussion, and all of you for participating and sharing your thoughts with us. It really helps us continue to provide the support you need for putting together some great ideas under these grants. So Ben, myself, and others have put their emails. Samantha, you'll add yours into the chat. Again, this session was recorded, and the link is on the Ocean Foundation website. That QR code there is a link to that site with the RFP. And these are our additional deadlines coming up, and our in-person meeting in April. Hopefully we'll see you there. But I bid you all a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, whatever time zone you're on. And thank you for your time with us today. Have a great rest of your day.